All right, the New York Times op-ed page has carved out a strange relationship to the issue of marijuana legalization over the past year. There was Maureen Dowd's infamous experience with edibles in Colorado, where she ate a lot, and also David Brooks' own admission of his youthful pot-smoking indiscretions, much of which has been good for some laughs and snickers. But now, arguably the most influential editorial page in the nation, the Gray Lady, the beacon of the establishment, came out with a wave-making editorial this week, saying, quote, "The federal government should repeal the ban on marijuana, full stop." Shouldn't be too surprising, though, since that stance lines up with the public's view on legalization. According to Pew, a majority support marijuana legalization. New York Times in the past has been at the forefront of public opinion. Now the Times seems to be following public opinion as much as leading it. Joining me now, Andrew Rosenthal, editorial page editor for the New York Times. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So what about that idea that you guys are now coming out with this after this has sort of reached this crucial threshold in public opinion? Did that factor into the decision to do this?
Well, it did in a certain sense. I mean, it's indisputably true that public opinion has shifted.
Right.
There's no question about it. And we have been careful and cautious on this subject. But we found ourselves covering this issue just more and more and more on the editorial page because the states have been moving forward at an incredibly rapid pace to essentially defy federal law. And so we figured we needed to take a stand and we need to do it now. And so we did.
This is a nerdy journalism question. Maybe no one cares, but I'm interested. Like, is that a knockdown drag? Like, when it's like the New York Times comes out for marijuana legalization, like, that's a big deal. You're here now. It got a lot of press. Is that a big argument?
Inside?
Yeah, in the room.
No, not particularly. I was a little bit surprised when I told the publisher that we wanted to do it. He said, fine. I think he'd probably been there before I was. I think I was there before we did it. And
right.
You have to balance what you personally feel with what you think is good for the institution.
I cracked up a little of this, and I recognize that you are not the publisher of the New York Times, you're the editorial page editor, but
I'll
still,
take full responsibility.
New York Times will continue drug testing despite pot legalization stance. I mean, there is this sense in which there's a gap between public opinion and the kind of mechanisms that are still in place.
Correct.
Employers are still drug testing. Even an employer like the New York Times that apparently thinks that marijuana should be legal.
That's right. I mean, we test for, I don't really know exactly what we do. I passed, I'm happy to report, in 1987. But I do know that we test for a lot more than just marijuana.
Right.
Whether we're going to continue testing for marijuana or not, I don't know. If they ask me, I'll say stop.
Right.
But they won't.
Yeah, they don't.
Yeah.
I guess they don't consult the editorial page on HR.
They tend not to. Yeah, right.
So we found this really interesting quote. This is November 1996, and this is then drug czar Barry McCaffrey talking to your father. Legendary journalist and Times man. And this is what McCaffrey has to say. He's talking about state-based votes for medical marijuana.
Right.
And he basically says this is a Trojan horse. He says, we're now going to see this come up all over the country, and this is not paranoia on my part. This is a national legalization of drug strategy. It's not paranoia on my part. In other words, I see this not as two medical initiatives dealing with the terminally ill. I see this as part of a national effort to legalize drugs, starting with marijuana all over the U.S. And the thing is, he was totally right.
He was absolutely right. I'm not sure about drugs. I mean,
right.
you have to talk about different things here. But yes, that was a very clever strategy, if it was at the time, or maybe it was an accidental clever strategy. I've got no idea. To lead to the legalization of marijuana, or at least getting rid of the federal ban on marijuana, is not quite the same thing.
Right. So explain to me, what is it so important about getting rid of the federal ban now that you have states that have legalized?
Because according to the federal government, marijuana is a very high-level narcotic like heroin, worse than cocaine, worse than crystal meth, and the penalties are huge. And all of these states are now in defiance of federal law. And the federal government can at any moment swoop in and arrest you. And they've done it. Right. We had a very interesting documentary on our website, nytimes.com. I'm always told to mention.
Oh, that's what it is.
That's what it is.
You know, I keep Googling and I
know.
Can never...
Try Wall Street Journal. It was about a guy in Montana who was growing marijuana. You see him showing the head of the state police, the attorney general, the governor.
Right.
The DEA decided to raid him. And because he had rifles in his truck, because he was going hunting with his children, he got 80 years.
Wow.
For obeying the law. It's completely insane. And right now, while we're talking, probably 3 or 4 young black men are getting arrested somewhere, and their lives are being destroyed for some minor marijuana violation.
And that is, obviously, that's a lot of that time, that's state law, but there are big federal consequences as well.
Right.
Because it is all illegal under federal law.
Right. Now, even now, when the federal government is supposedly taking a benign attitude to what's going on in Colorado and Washington, or at least they're not prosecuting people.
Right.
The federal government is saying, for example, that you can't use federal water in Colorado to irrigate marijuana plants. All the water in Colorado is federal. It's ridiculous. And so you have one branch of the federal government that's saying one thing, another branch that's saying another. And the fact of the matter is the federal government shouldn't be involved in this at all. This should be up to the states.
The laboratories of democracy. Andrew Rosenthal from the New York Times. Really a pleasure.
Thanks very much. I'm glad to be here.
All right.